Hello and welcome to the Employee Advocacy and Influence podcast. My name's Lewis Gray and I'm a Senior Marketing Manager here at Disseminate. We've got a very special guest on today's episode. So our guest today is Brad Nevin, and Brad's role sits within the Global Digital Communications team at Nissan. And to be honest with you, we've wanted to get Brad on the podcast really since we started inviting guests. So for anybody that's not aware, Nissan were actually very early adopters of employee advocacy, and they launched a program with Disseminate a number of years ago now. And it started as a small pilot just to kind of assess the appetite within the business and to monitor the results from that pilot. It's gone from that and almost single-handedly because of Brad to the global presence that it has within the Nissan Corporation today. And really, the reason that Elliot and I enjoyed this conversation so much is because Brad was kind enough to share details on some of the challenges that they ran into, both when they were trying to launch the program and, with the day-to-day management. So we touch on user adoption, we speak about employee engagement tactics and a number of other things as well. So I really hope you enjoy this one. But before we jump into the episode, I did just want to say that our founder, Bradley Keenan, is still very kindly giving away free copies of his book. It's called Employee Advocacy, 101 Cheat Codes, and it is as the name suggests. So if you're thinking of launching a program, if you're managing one, it includes 101 tips or cheat codes, as they're called in the book, for managing a program. And this is from, I think nearly 9 years in business now. So if you want to grab a copy, we'll pop a link in the show notes, wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast. But let's get into the episode. Right. So, Brad, firstly, welcome to the podcast. We're absolutely delighted to have you here. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and your role at Nissan?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. My role at Nissan is with our global digital comms group in Japan. It's maybe a little bit unusual because I sit in the US and our US office is in Nashville and our global headquarters is in Yokohama, so I visit both. But we do the bread and butter of what we do are newsrooms, and I think we'll talk about that a little later, but we have newsroom platforms around the world. We own a few social media channels like LinkedIn, which is the base of all this employee advocacy stuff. X and YouTube we also own, and there's a host of digital tools that we've created to support comms groups around the world. But yeah, that's probably it in a nutshell.
Amazing. Yeah, we've been very excited to talk with you, to be honest with you, because I've joked about this previously, but you've kind of become a bit of almost an extension of the Disseminate team in that everybody within the business seems to have had an interaction with you at some point. Everybody speaks so fondly of you. So when we were looking for guests, I have been nagging Elliot for some time to see if we could get you on. And Elliot, I believe I'm right in saying you guys worked together in the early days?
Yeah, back in my previous role in customer success before what I'm doing now, I was part of onboarding and scaling out and launching and everything in between the Nissan advocacy program with Brad for the whole thing. So yeah, we know each other quite well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I feel like I'm looking forward to this conversation just as much as many of our listeners will be, I'm sure, because yeah, I'm excited to kind of understand the full story and to maybe fill the gaps in the stories that I've heard as well. But for the listeners' sake, we wanted to get Brad on for a number of reasons that I've just mentioned, but also he's done an exemplary job of growing a employee advocacy program from the ground up, really. And it's now this global operation at Nissan, and Brad is pretty much solely responsible for the success of that. So we're going to go through a few challenges that he's encountered along the way, because I feel like that's always valuable for our listeners. Even the most successful programs in the world, in fact, it's usually the most successful ones, do encounter challenges because it encourages you to think outside the box to solve them and come up with, innovative workarounds and things like that. So there'll be plenty of value in this, I'm sure. But Brad, I wanted to just start right at the very beginning, if we could, and just understand, how did employee advocacy start at Nissan and what was the initial vision?
Yeah. We have a saying in our group: we like trying new things, we like testing new things, and we tell ourselves it's okay if it fails. This was kind of one of those things. We have tried a few things that have failed, but It's nice that senior leadership has said that's okay. So it did start that way. There was a tool that built into LinkedIn a long time ago where they did try to encourage people to put things in there for employees to share. I heard a year or two ago they sunsetted that program, but it wasn't great. But we saw the value in that, and I knew about your platform, and boy, I don't even remember how we got connected. It's been so long, but having the tool to really manage it with the back end, with the front end, where it just feels like an ordinary social media site that you go and share something, was really the appeal. And it is connected to LinkedIn. I was in Japan years ago when LinkedIn was sort of just getting started. No one really paid much attention to it. It was still that resume uploading site. And I remember my manager said, gee, why don't you start amplifying what we do on the newsroom on LinkedIn? And I did, and it took off. And since then, we've hired a person and even have agency support in Japan to support LinkedIn. So a lot of what we do is focused on LinkedIn, and we know our employees are on there, and just amplifying what we are doing on LinkedIn via our employees just seemed a natural extension of that corporate account.
And was this something that you actively sought out at the time, or was it a process of, I know you've just said it's kind of difficult to remember where this initially came from, but do you remember if it was somebody approaching you saying, hey, have you tried this? Or was it something that, Nissan as a team were like, we want to do this. What's
Yeah,
out there? How can we solve for this?
it's so long ago, I can't remember. We did have a LinkedIn person in the US. It was 2 or 3 people ago where we knew about the tool and we talked about it, but it didn't go anywhere. But finally, I think with that attitude of let's just try new things, it worked. So we did get a contract. It was with 500 people just to kick the tires. It was like, let's just make sure this thing works. Let's just try it out. I remember I saw power users on LinkedIn, Nissan employees who were sharing a lot. There were 2 or 3 of them. And I said, can you guys come on and just try this out? And they were very excited to try it out. And it just took off from there. Yeah. But with that 500 user test was the beginning.
I remember that sort of early 500 where we sort of said, oh,
Yeah.
okay, we've got some select people across a few different markets. And then
Yeah.
I think the initial thoughts really, if I'm being candid, beyond your scope and for some of the other people that were involved, I don't think they ever really anticipated it breaching kind of 300 to 400 people in the business. I thought they expected it to be a small, close-knit group, and that was kind of all it would ever be. And it just, once the wheels get turning on these things, it's quite a nice situation to be in. But more and more people just onboarding, and we smashed through that 500 marker quite quickly.
I think you had a prediction and it always rang through. You were like, people are going to be coming out of the woodwork asking, hey, can I jump on board this fun train? And
Yeah.
you were right.
It's it's always, it's pretty much always once you're a business of your size, it's just, you get something with 500 people, that's quite a lot of people. You get something with 1,000 people in a business, so a lot of different stakeholders that deal in a lot of different stuff. Particularly at a business like Nissan, you've got so much kind of marketing content, so much product content, just so much stuff happening all at the same time, that there's all these different like the racing team. Nismo is such a good example, right, where they start coming kind of it being more and more involved. They want more and more of their content involved, and you get all these different stakeholders and business units that suddenly notice it. They may not be the one like you to take the initial step to say, actually, I think this is a really good thing and I'm willing to try and fail, and if it fails, it's okay.
Mhm.
But a lot of people don't take that step, and I think that's half the battle, right? Once you've taken it, you've taken the risk, everybody else wants a little piece and they can see the value all of a sudden.
And that's been happening. And that's been the key to our growth where there's a combination of me reaching out to people saying, can we invite you? And that's happening in countries around the world. But then there are groups who have approached me, like our HR group, our business and fleet group, our after sales group. Some of them have said, hey, I see potential in this. Can we talk about this? And I always say yes. And we invite their whole group. And then sometimes we've done little meetings with them afterwards, just short 30-minute things to say, this is how this works. This is the value it brings to you. This is the value it brings to the country. If you really want to lean into the tool, these are some pro tips. But all of that has worked to help
I think I think the big advantage as well is yourself being the central person, like your sort of central ownership of the tool.
Yeah.
It means sometimes with these tools in businesses, they become quite faceless, right? They don't have anybody that kind of owns them in the same way. Like internal intranets can sometimes just be owned by a general department or something like that. But when people can go, oh, you need to just talk to Brad about that he's the person that solves that. He'll talk you through it. It's so easy for people to actually go, actually, I'm going to message Brad and I need to find out, and I want to get X and I want to get Y and I want to do this and that and find out more. It's a really nice place for you to be in the business where all of these different stakeholders are coming to you to ask questions about this tool that's kind of everybody's involved in.
I think it's important to remember as well, and you've just said it benefits other people. And once they start doing it, they realize the benefits. We've found as a business when working with, all of our clients, the best way to get more employees on board is often when you've had one employee see some sort of, I don't want to say viral success, but just maybe one post that's done exceptionally well. Maybe it could be a salesperson that's closed a deal off the back of it. But when they see the successes of others, that usually then contributes to this buzz around the initiative and other people want to start doing it.
Can I expand on that a little bit? We did one of our big moments was we did a survey. I don't remember how into it we were, but it was enough where we had a good number of people. And we got a lot of replies to it, a few hundred, I think. And it took me 5 minutes to jot down some notes, and I have them right here. And I think it's worth it to just read a few of these. If I'm in a presentation, I just do 2 or 3, but we've got a little time. But this is really enlightening. So I just opened my PowerPoint. My social network has grown by a lot. I spend less time prepping content on my own. It's nice to know everything I'm sharing is approved and ready to go. Initially, I was intimidated by social. However, I now understand how important it is for me to be an ambassador for the company. Good for the Nissan brand, aligns with Nissan's strategy. My social presence is increasing. Keeps me engaged. People reach out to me every day to tell me they love seeing my posts. I'm an HRTA and have over 10,000 followers.
I think so many of those speak volumes to just like the generalization that a lot of people are just really unsure of businesses, and giving them a way to go, you can share content and we would encourage you to do it through this approved tool that is enabling you to do that. Suddenly there's just such a big unlock where everyone goes, oh, I feel like I can do this. I get why I'm doing this. This is really, really easy and I like it. It's remarkable that just that step of there is something that is dedicated for this, as opposed to we would like you to post on social media, please do it in your own time. There's such a step change between those two items. I think it's remarkable. I think that surveys was such a good thing to do. If anyone is listening that is running an advocacy program, run a survey, ask people these questions. I always used to talk about, and I think we would have spoken about, Brad, anecdotes being so much more powerful than data more often than not, particularly when you're doing internal presentations and those sort of things. If you can have, we sold X, Y, or Z because somebody posted something onto LinkedIn, because this one person posted something onto LinkedIn and their network, that's so much more powerful than often the metrics that we all kind of live and die by, which is like all the marketing metrics that nobody else really thinks about day to day. They don't know what good website traffic looks like compared to bad website traffic in a month. So being able to say, hey, but we sold 8 cars off the back of this LinkedIn post, that's a very different story to be able to tell people.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Brad, one thing I did want to come on to, when planning this episode, we kept speaking about how you'd gone from this pilot, and I don't want to call it a small pilot because obviously 500 employees to Nissan is obviously a small number of people in the grand scheme of things, but to many companies that would be the maximum number of employees they have in their program. But going from what we kept saying was pilot to powerhouse, I know obviously you encountered a few challenges on the way, and every program does. And like I said, it's usually the best ones that do because they thrive as a result of their solutions. But what were some of the biggest challenges Nissan encountered with getting this off the ground?
One of the biggest challenges was adding users. I thought it would come naturally and organically by word of mouth, and that did happen. But I found you really had to focus on it and really try. We found 3 things worked. We have the existing structure, I think I mentioned earlier, with our newsrooms around the world. We have newsrooms for people in India Africa, Middle East, Europe. We have that connection with them. We already knew friends around the world who I could say, do you want to jump on board with this program? So we reached out to countries. A few executives let us invite people within their teams. There's a marketing person in Japan who had 300 or 400 people below her, and I asked if we could invite them, and she said yes, and that was great. Our head of HR in the US let us invite all the people under him, and that just took off like crazy once we invited him. And then the third way was various groups of people, like our after sales group, again, the HR group. We have a business and fleet group in the US, and they really saw the value in this. And they actually invited me down to Nashville. I live in Michigan, but I went down to Nashville and presented to their team of 30 or 40 people who sell to businesses and fleets. And that's not just one or two sales. It's like 100 or 200 to a company and he said, wow, this is great. If I could get my salespeople on board and really have them work their networks, this is just going to be gold. So it was those three kind of tactics with countries, executives, and then business groups within the company that we reached out to and invited hundreds of people at a time in chunks. And from there, it just grew.
I think that's such a sort of typical. I tend to see there are two big approaches for a business of your size. When you're a business of 400, not to trivialize people's advocacy programs, but you can invite 400 people in one go quite easily to a tool like this as like a global thing for a business of that size. When you're Nissan, it's not quite so simple. You can, and I've done it in the past, where if you can go high enough up the kind of food chain within the business to a CEO, to a CMO, that kind of global comms the entire process out, you can do it. It's still difficult and you still don't get the kind of same level of uptake. The other way is exactly as you've described, and it's the best way to do it, in my opinion, which is let's go business unit by business unit. Let's go to these core functions that we know and we understand and talk to their value proposition as well. Like to your point about the fleet sales team, they've got their own reasoning by why they might need to do this, which is we sell fleets of cars and it takes a really long time and they're long deal cycles and we need to stay in touch and people need to know that we do sell fleets of cars. That's a whole different value proposition to their HR team that works in Japan, as an example, that are going to be very focused on talent acquisition in APAC exclusively, and they've got a whole different reason why they need to use a tool like this. And being able to break that down into the biggest buckets possible, I think is a good way to describe it. The more people you can catch in that kind of general topic, the better. But going through all of those different areas, those regions, their value propositions for each one, that's what makes this work at big companies, I think. And it's the same with those stakeholders that come out the woodwork, right? They're the same people. They own a business unit or a team or whoever it might be, and they've got wind of this and they want to be involved. They're the easy ones because they're coming to you. The ones that you have to go out to, that's a different conversation to have sometimes at big companies.
But some things may resonate with people more than others. So we'd like to have that content for all those groups.
I think that's what's so nice about, again, like Nissan as a business with the amount of marketing content and like really amazing marketing content. You have that kind of globalized, here's the latest advert for the Pathfinder or whatever it might be. That's relevant to everyone, right? Anyone can share that. But then you've also got, actually Pathfinder is quite a good example, not a car you particularly see in the UK, probably focused more in the US market with that. So actually you want to start marginalizing that content, say, well, this is for the US market, not so much EMEA, and then sort of so on and so forth, where you can really break that content up to the people that it matters to. Even the most obvious example for Nissan is Japanese content versus English content, right? There's such a big contingency in Japan that I don't speak Japanese and most people in Japan don't speak a huge amount of English or wouldn't read it on LinkedIn in that way. So just being able to break things up by language and provide relevant content to relevant people means people like the tool more because they can go in and there's something for them, as opposed to, oh, I'm just going to have to share generic kind of global content that's just another advert or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to I mean, just to hear the way that you've approached different regions, and one of the questions I was going to ask was just on how you manage to keep employees engaged and how you maintain momentum. But I think what you've just said really touches on that, just ensuring that everybody has content that's relevant to them. Because, we've seen it in the past, or we've heard stories about it where organizations might struggle with employee engagement. And when they've opened up a survey, it's, I didn't feel like there was content in there that was relevant to me, my network. So something I was curious to know about is we've spoken about this previously, but naturally employees don't always want to participate from the offset. They don't understand the value in posting on social media. And even when you communicate it to them, there might still be some hesitancy there. So Brad, how did you handle regions or teams that were hesitant to participate in advocacy?
We used the force on them. Instead of saying, these aren't the droids you're looking for, we just go over to them and say, this is the content you should be sharing. And we've done that very well.
I think the answer will go down swimmingly with our CEO. He's
I
a big Star Wars fan.
I had to get my Star Wars line. So the way we've done regions who have been hesitant to share, and I'm doing this as we speak. I'll use Japan as an example because I don't speak Japanese, but we are leaning on the corporate posts that we do in Japanese. And I can put a variety of images in there for people to pick from. But honestly, I copy and paste the text in Japanese on our company post. It should be rewritten, so it's a little more conversational, and there should be some text options. But it is what it is now. We did have a project where I was translating all my short little snippets, but that was kind of burdensome. So we stopped doing that. But it's still working. People are still doing it. I'm doing the same in Mexico. We've actually just had some meetings with Mexico to get them on board. But just to show them how it works. I posted some things in Spanish. I know a little Spanish, but it's not as great as I wish it was, but it's just there. And we're really leaning on the newsroom like we were in the early days, but let's just get that started. So I just put it in there. And I think another one of the keys, and we've talked about this before, is just getting someone to own it. Someone has to do this. I would love to help in those languages and kind of do it for them, but we can't. But we're still struggling to get someone in Japan. I think we may have had a breakthrough in Mexico where we reach someone. And it's funny, as you talk to people around the world, they just sort of get it. It just clicks. And I've had to push a little bit in most countries. In Brazil, we have had a person named Alexandre who just said, okay, I'll do it. And he's posting in Portuguese and targeting a Brazil team. And he's just going, like, he's just, I love him. And he's doing such a great job with this. And maybe it's the climate in Brazil where everyone loves social media. We know that's true. But I didn't do anything to him. I didn't have to twist his arm. He just said, yeah, let's go. I said,
and sometimes that's part of the game, right? When, again, you're managing something less from a top-down perspective and we're trying to get buy-in from different regions as to why they should do this. The delegation is really important, right? You can't centrally manage such an enormous program. It would just be unrealistic because your whole life would be it, and it would be, even then, not enough time. But being able to delegate that out to those different regions, they get a higher quality as well. It's just getting, as you said, people to buy into that process of, why should I do this? What's the benefit to me? And again, it's just talking to that use case for these regions, for these business units. Why is this valuable for you? Well, you run the digital side of Mexico. This is going to be a very, very good way for you to show a lot of results off the back of all of that, all the content that you're producing, all the impact you're going to have. It's just a really kind of stepping stone process with a lot of these places. As you said, start small, start with the newsroom in your case, and let them run with it from there.
And we're not cold calling these people. I love the newsroom foundation that we have, and we keep coming back to that. And that's how I know these people. But it was that LinkedIn management strategy globally, where one account, regions around the world, post and target their country. So I get into the LinkedIn admin and I see, I saw someone in India was posting a lot. And I don't see those posts because I'm not in India, but I can see them in the admin. They're posting a lot, and I got some really good content. It's kind of long and it's kind of businessy, so it needs to be rewritten. So what I've done is I've taken a few and just put them in there and then reached out to that person and said, can we get this going? And it's working, but it takes work. It doesn't happen by itself. Well, it does in Brazil, but it doesn't in the other countries, but we're still working on it, and it's clearly working.
Well, Brad, obviously we spoke at the start about how much of a success this program has been. Obviously, that's largely the reason why we wanted to speak with you today, because you've just taken it from that, again, reluctant to say it, but small pilot for Nissan to what it is today. I want to come on to the impact that you've seen, but just one thing that I was curious about that I probably should have touched on a little bit earlier, really, but was just about how you got senior leadership buy-in from different markets along the way. Was it just as you've just described, or were there any other tactics that you had to implement?
I think it was us reaching out to those executives, and they're already power users on LinkedIn. They're the ones who sort of grabbed onto it. It is a little bit of me reaching out to them, but with senior leadership, yeah, I think that's pretty much the way it is. Largely organic and kind of a balance between them noticing it and reaching out and me sort of saying, hey, can we invite your team?
Love that. Yeah, I think it's just always it's always helpful for our listeners to know, because Elliot will know this from his time in customer success and sales. I know you're going to be smiling and nodding along, but it's just getting the senior leadership on board from day one just makes all the difference in user adoption and continued engagement across different markets for any employee advocacy program. So it's always good to get some new takes on that. But coming on to the impact and the various successes that you've seen from this program, what would you say you're most proud of to date?
To me, the analytics suite is, I don't mean to boast your own site because we're talking about employee advocacy as a whole, but that's a really valuable tool. As you just go into analytics, and there's two. We're tracking the users, and since we put our foot on the gas, that started to increase. So we're all really happy about that. The one net metric that I really like is LinkedIn audience size, and we just passed 1 million. And I like to compare that to, on the company side, it's 1.6 million. And we have 2,300 employees sharing now. And like I say, it's just going like this. When we post on LinkedIn and target the US, it goes to 270,000. And it's about, so, I mean, I like to say Nissan on the mind. It's just more people are seeing things about Nissan. There's one more thing that I'm going to touch on, the hashtags. So we use 2 hashtags. One, you have to use it, hashtag Nissan employee. That's kind of whenever you post as employee, you have to identify yourself, and that's just sort of the way it is. But the other one is hashtag NissanProud. And I invented that hashtag, and now we put that in all of our posts. And I've seen that from other companies to just say Delta Airlines I'm a big fan of, and a lot of their employees say Delta Pride. So seeing that, I mean, I know no one searches for that hashtag, but when you just see Nissan Proud in posts that are all over the place, it reinforces the fact that I'm proud to work here. And that's been a big goal that we've seen from senior leadership at the very top, saying we want people to be proud to work for Nissan. And with all of our great cars and culture, it's not hard to do, but they all have those hashtag now. So I'm real proud of that. And the fact that our users are growing so quickly that I know that thanks to employees sharing, as we add users, it'll surpass the reach of the company page probably this year, certainly this year.
And I think that's always a milestone that I look at when I've worked with clients, is looking at that audience size. And for anybody that's kind of unfamiliar here, that LinkedIn audience size is something that we track, where we look at how many employees are signed up to your advocacy program, how many connections do they all collectively have on LinkedIn. And it's a really nice way to look at the potential reach, the potential audience that you can be talking to through your employees versus the potential audience that you have on your corporate page. And Nissan's such a fun example because they're Nissan and everyone knows who Nissan are, and lots of people follow them on LinkedIn. As we've just heard, there's 1.6 million. So it's really nice to be able to have that comparison, say, actually, from the employees that we've got activated and that are sharing, this is how many people we can be reaching. Now, I think the real benefit is actually that audience is much more powerful. And that's the thing that people don't talk about quite as much, is as anybody will know, when a company posts something, we pay attention, we see it, and maybe we engage sometimes. But when a person talks about the same thing, that's what people engage with. So the audience power that you have from individuals is so much more, so much higher kind of engagement across the board compared to the corporate following. And if you really dig into the weeds with this, you can start looking at engagements per 1,000 and things like that. We can look at, CPM and different metrics like that. And that's a very different ball game when you look at your advocacy impact to your corporate page impact. But at the same time, Brad, I think the NissanProud, I see it all over my LinkedIn because I'm connected to loads of people at Nissan from my days working with you. Those, I think, are the things we hear most when people say, what are we really pleased with? What's been great to see? It is so often just someone said, I just saw somebody posted NissanProud, and it was a picture of the car that they'd just picked up because they bought it through the employee portal. And do you know what? That's just really, really nice to see. And it's just nice to see that happening really organically. And those sort of sentiments are just perfect, in my opinion.
Yes.
But Brad, I'm curious to know, what do you think is the future of employee advocacy, and how should companies approach it in 2025 and beyond?
When I think of the future in comms PR world, I'm kind of an old school magazine guy, thinking the traditional journalists who write stories about our cars or everything, but that's not it. So things are changing. In the comms world, we talk a lot about influencers, and there's three types, but a lot of people only talk about two. So there's our marketing group pay people with huge followings on social to go talk about our cars, and that's one thing. The lower level influencers are people with smaller followers, and they're excited to get a car for a week. They're like, oh my God, I get to get a car. I can talk about it on my social. So that's the more common interpretation of influencers. But I think we forget that our employees are influencers, that they have such wide connections, that they connect with so many people. I love the saying that you never know who your social media star will be. There are people all over the world, like most of them maybe in Brazil, but it's like, man, that guy just shares like crazy, and he has a ton, just a huge following. And in the way it helps your employees, the way it helps spread our message, I think all of our employees collectively are just a huge influencer. So I think people are starting to realize that, and it's becoming more not, it's still sort of a small thing. You read some articles that say, oh, this is the trend, this is what's going to be coming this year, employee advocacy. But I think as the definition of an influencer expands, I think employees are going to be part of it.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, and people really need to hear that. You don't know who your social media superstars are. We can always make an educated guess. We advise people to start with senior leaders. They tend to have very engaged audiences, and they tend to have large networks, and they wield a lot of influence. But I can actually share a story that happened with us recently. We had a piece of content that we were pushing through our own networks, and naturally I wanted our CEO to post it because I thought, he gets a lot of engagement on his posts. I wanted our VP of marketing to share it, and they both did. But the post that actually skyrocketed in performance is our post-production and digital marketing aficionado, Selena. It wasn't a shock because, like I say, she's on top of it with social media, but for her to just outperform, our CEO 4 times over was just crazy. But again, it just goes to show you don't know who has the most influence. It could be anybody. And again, they're already on your payroll, so it really doesn't get easier than that in terms of cost effectiveness. But Brad, I guess a nice place to finish might be to offer some words of wisdom to anybody that's in the position that you were in a few years ago when you're starting this thing out. What advice would you give to somebody who's just now starting an employee advocacy program in 2025 or whenever they might be hearing this?
It kind of sounds old-fashioned, and it's kind of that silly thing you hear people talk about careers, like just stick with it. But I don't, there is a certain amount of patience required, I think, but reaching out to as many people as you can, I think. My manager in Japan, Ian, says he gets notes from people all over the world saying, do you know this Brad guy? which is funny, but maybe that's it. Like, don't be shy and reach out. Because sometimes it's, oh man, I can't reach out to that executive, but do it. Like, they're real people too. And they're like, sometimes when they just go, sure, it's funny. And you're like, okay, wow. Like, I didn't think that could happen, but reach out to find those groups within the company that have value in this and do it group by group and just reach out.
That's a fantastic final thought. I was going to say as well, you started on this towards the beginning, but you said about the fact that you approached your LinkedIn superstars who you knew were already posting on LinkedIn and just being super targeted with your approach. Yeah. I imagine just really helped to build that momentum. So yeah, again, people need to hear this, but listen to and replicate what Brad's saying, because it really is a recipe for success. But yeah, Brad, just finally, thank you so much for joining us for this episode today. I know there's plenty of actionable takeaways for our listeners, but where can people keep up with you? Where's the best place to do that?
I think on LinkedIn, I'm pretty easy to find. There's lots of pictures of race cars and a few pictures of airplanes on my LinkedIn, so you won't have a hard time finding it.
It's always a pleasure to see those posts in feed. But thank you again. And thank you very much to our listeners for taking the time. And we'll catch you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.